15 years after the tragic death of Michael Jackson, the world continues to grapple with the loss of one of the most iconic figures in music history. His death was sudden, shocking, and steeped in controversy, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence artists across the globe. However, recent revelations by his daughter, Paris Jackson, have cast a new and disturbing light on the circumstances surrounding her father's demise. What she disclosed has not only shocked his fans, but has also reopened old wounds and sparked fresh debate over the nature of his death. Paris Jackson, who has largely stayed away from the spotlight that once consumed her father, recently sat down for a rare interview during which she revealed what she describes as the terrible secret about her father's final moments. Her voice trembled as she recounted the harrowing details, the pain evident in her eyes as she relived the trauma that has haunted her family for over a decade. The world was not prepared for what she had to say. In March 2009, Michael Jackson announced what would be his final curtain call. The This Is It concert series was intended to be his grand return to the stage, his swan song that would re-establish him as the king of pop. The announcement came at a press conference at the O2 Arena in London, where Jackson appeared before a sea of reporters and fans. Dressed in a sequined jacket and wearing his signature sunglasses, he exuded a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "This is it," he proclaimed, his voice carrying the weight of his words. "This is the final curtain call. I'll see you in July, and I love you so much." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, all 50 shows sold out, a testament to Jackson's enduring appeal despite years of relative silence following the highly publicized and damaging 2005 child molestation trial, in which he was acquitted. Fans from around the world scrambled to get tickets, eager to witness what was promised to be a spectacular event, a culmination of Jackson's illustrious career. But behind the scenes, all was not well. Jackson was struggling, both physically and mentally. The pressures of the upcoming tour, combined with his deteriorating health, were beginning to take a toll on him. He was plagued by insomnia, a condition that had haunted him for years. As the tour's start date loomed, Jackson became increasingly desperate for relief from the sleepless nights that left him exhausted and frail. Michael Jackson had always been a man of contradictions, a public figure who craved privacy, a man who embodied both childlike innocence and world-weary sophistication. But in the final months of his life, these contradictions seemed to coalesce into a singular, desperate need: the need for sleep. Those close to Jackson have described his insomnia as crippling, a relentless affliction that no amount of traditional medication could seem to alleviate. In his desperation, Jackson turned to an unorthodox solution: propofol, a powerful intravenous anesthetic typically used during surgery. It was a dangerous choice, one that no responsible physician would recommend as a sleep aid. Yet, Jackson was insistent. He referred to the drug as his milk, a comforting balm that promised him the rest he so desperately needed. Dr. Conrad Murray, Jackson's personal physician at the time, would later testify that the pop star had been using propofol for years. Jackson was adamant that he could not sleep without it, and despite his reservations, Murray eventually acquiesced to his demands. It was a decision that would have fatal consequences. As the rehearsals for This Is It intensified, so did Jackson's reliance on the drug. He was determined to give his fans the performance of a lifetime, but his body was beginning to fail him. Choreographer Travis Payne, who worked closely with Jackson during the rehearsals, later recounted that the singer appeared frail and unfocused at times. Jackson, once known for his precision and energy on stage, was now asking for teleprompters to be installed so he could remember the lyrics to his own songs. But the show had to go on, and Jackson pushed himself to the limit. Behind the scenes, He was making frantic calls to his friend and nurse, Sherilyn Lee, begging her to help him obtain more propofol. "All I need is something to help me sleep," he pleaded. "Just find me an anesthesiologist, please." Lee, concerned about the risks, refused his requests, warning him of the dangers of using such a powerful drug outside of a controlled medical setting. But Jackson was undeterred. He insisted that another doctor had assured him that propofol was safe as long as he was monitored. His desperation was palpable, and it was clear that he would do whatever it took to get the rest he needed. On the night of June 24, 2009, Michael Jackson returned to his rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles, after a grueling rehearsal at the Staples Center. It was past midnight, and Jackson was exhausted, but still unable to sleep. He asked Dr. Murray for his usual dose of propofol, but Murray, concerned about the potential for overdose, refused. Instead, he administered a cocktail of other sedatives, lorazepam, midazolam, and diazepam, in an attempt to help Jackson sleep without resorting to propofol. But Jackson remained awake, growing increasingly agitated as the night wore on. He paced the room, his anxiety mounting with each passing hour. At one point, he reportedly begged Murray, "Please, please give me my milk. I need to sleep. They will kill me if I don't perform well tomorrow." These words, now infamous, have been the subject of endless speculation. Some have taken them as a literal plea, believing that Jackson feared for his life if he did not fulfill his contractual obligations to AEG Live, the concert promoters behind This Is It. Others interpret them as the desperate ramblings of a man at the end of his rope, consumed by exhaustion and paranoia. As dawn approached, Murray finally relented. He administered 25 milligrams of propofol, a small dose by clinical standards, but enough to induce the sleep that Jackson so desperately sought. He stayed by Jackson's side, monitoring his pulse and breathing. For a while, everything seemed fine. Jackson's breathing slowed, and he appeared to be resting peacefully. But around 10:40 a.m., Murray realized something was wrong. Jackson's breathing had become shallow, and then, suddenly, it stopped altogether. Panicking, Murray began CPR, frantically trying to revive the singer. But it was too late. By the time paramedics arrived, Jackson was in full cardiac arrest. They worked on him for over an hour, but their efforts were in vain. At 2:26 p.m., Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at the Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. The world was stunned by the news. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was gone. Fans gathered outside the hospital, holding vigils and singing his songs in tribute. The media coverage was relentless, with every detail of his life and death dissected in the days and weeks that followed. The official cause of death was acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication, compounded by the fact that Jackson's frail body could not withstand the barrage of sedatives. Dr. Conrad Murray was later charged with involuntary manslaughter and found guilty, sentenced to 4 years in prison for his role in Jackson's death. But for those closest to Jackson, the legal verdict brought little comfort. His family, particularly his children, were left to grapple with the loss of a father who, despite his fame and fortune, had lived a life marked by loneliness and suffering. Paris Jackson, just 11 years old at the time, was thrust into the spotlight as the world watched her every move. Her grief was palpable as she stood before the crowd at her father's memorial service, tearfully declaring, "Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine." In the years that followed, Paris would struggle with her own demons, battling depression and anxiety as she tried to navigate life without the man who had been her protector and her hero. She largely shunned the public eye, seeking solace in music and art. But the shadow of her father's death loomed large. And then, 15 years after that fateful day, Paris Jackson dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the world once again. In an interview that she described as one of the most difficult things she had ever done, Paris revealed what she called the terrible secret about her father's death. According to Paris, Michael Jackson had been deeply troubled in the months leading up to his death. He confided in her that he felt his life was in danger, that there were people who wanted him dead. He spoke of shadowy figures who had been following him, watching his every move. At the time, Paris had dismissed these fears as the paranoid delusions of a man who had endured years of scrutiny and betrayal. But now, looking back, she wasn't so sure. What Paris disclosed next was even more shocking. She claimed that on the night before his death, her father had told her something that she had never revealed to anyone, not even to the police. He had said that if anything were to happen to him, it would not be an accident. He made her promise that she would protect her brothers and that she would one day tell the world the truth. He warned her not to trust anyone, not even the doctors who were supposed to be taking care of him. He was convinced that there was a conspiracy to end his life, and that the upcoming tour was part of a larger plan to push him to his limits, physically and mentally. And Paris had been too young at the time to fully understand the gravity of her father's words, but they haunted her in the years that followed. As she grew older and learned more about the circumstances surrounding his death, she began to piece together a narrative that, to her, made sense of his fears. She noticed the inconsistencies in the accounts given by those who were with her father in his final days, the strange behavior of certain individuals who had been part of his inner circle, and the financial interests that seemed to be at play. One of the most chilling aspects of Paris's revelation was her assertion that Michael Jackson had been pressured into the This Is It tour against his will. She claimed that he had confided in her about his reservations, expressing doubts about whether he could physically handle the demanding schedule. He was, after all, not the same man who had moonwalked his way into the history books. Years of stress, scandal, and physical deterioration had taken their toll. But according to Paris, those concerns were brushed aside by those who stood to profit from the tour. Paris described how her father had been kept in a state of constant anxiety and fear, with certain individuals exploiting his vulnerability. She mentioned that Jackson's access to his own finances was severely restricted, leaving him dependent on those around him who controlled his assets. This financial manipulation, she suggested, was a form of coercion, a way to ensure that he would go through with the tour despite his misgivings. In the interview, Paris recounted the last conversation she had with her father on the evening of June 24th. He was unusually affectionate, telling her how much he loved her and how proud he was of the young woman she was becoming. But there was also a note of desperation in his voice, a sense that he was trying to convey something important, something that she might not understand until much later. He told her to be strong, to take care of her brothers, and to remember everything he had taught her about resilience and courage. That night, as Paris lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She had no way of knowing that it would be the last time she would ever speak to her father. Paris's revelations have reopened many of the questions that have lingered since Michael Jackson's death. Why was a drug as dangerous as propofol being administered in a home setting? What role did financial pressures play in his decision to go ahead with the This Is It tour? And perhaps most disturbingly, was there indeed a conspiracy to push Jackson beyond his breaking point? The official investigation into Jackson's death concluded that it was a tragic accident, the result of medical negligence on the part of Dr. Conrad Murray. But Paris's account suggests that there may have been more at play. She hinted at the involvement of powerful individuals and entities with a vested interest in Jackson's demise, though she stopped short of naming names. Her reluctance to do so, she said, was partly out of fear for her own safety and the safety of her family. The Jackson family has always been fiercely protective of Michael's legacy, and Paris's revelations have only intensified their resolve to seek justice. They have long maintained that the full truth about his death has yet to be revealed, and Paris's testimony has given new impetus to their calls for a more thorough investigation. In the days following Paris's interview, the media was abuzz with speculation. Some dismissed her claims as the product of a grieving daughter's imagination, while others saw them as a credible challenge to the official narrative. Legal experts weighed in, debating whether there was enough evidence to reopen the case. Fans of Michael Jackson, who have remained loyal and passionate about his legacy, rallied around Paris, expressing their support and urging authorities to take her claims seriously. Michael Jackson's legacy is one of unparalleled artistic achievement, but it is also one marred by controversy and tragedy. His music, his performances, and his influence on popular culture are undeniable, yet his life was filled with personal turmoil and public scrutiny. The revelations made by Paris Jackson have added yet another layer of complexity to his story, one that forces us to reconsider what we thought we knew about the King of Pop. For Paris, telling her father's story is both a responsibility and a burden. She has made it clear that she does not seek fame or attention, but rather, she feels a deep obligation to honor her father's memory by shedding light on the truth as she understands it. In her own words, "My father was more than just an icon. He was a man who was used and betrayed by people he trusted, and it's time the world knows what really happened." As the public grapples with these new revelations, the question of Michael Jackson's death remains a haunting mystery. Was it truly an accident? A tragic consequence of a man driven to the edge by his own demons and the pressures of fame? Or was it something more sinister, a calculated act by those who stood to gain from his downfall? In the end, the story of Michael Jackson's death is not just about the loss of a musical genius, but also about the darker side of fame and the human cost of living in the spotlight. It is a story of exploitation, betrayal, and ultimately, a profound tragedy that continues to reverberate through the lives of those he left behind. In the wake of Paris Jackson's revelations, there has been renewed interest in the circumstances surrounding her father's death. Advocacy groups, fans, and even some members of the media have called for a reopening of the investigation. They argue that the original inquiry may have overlooked key evidence and that new testimonies, such as Paris's, should be taken into account. However, reopening a case as high-profile as Michael Jackson's is no small feat. Legal hurdles, the passage of time, and the influence of powerful figures who may prefer that the case remains closed all present significant challenges. Nonetheless, the pressure is mounting, and the Jackson family is more determined than ever to uncover the full truth. For Paris, the journey to uncovering the truth is deeply personal. It is not just about seeking justice for her father, but also about finding peace for herself and her family. She has spoken about the toll that her father's death and the subsequent controversies have taken on her mental health. By coming forward with her story, she hopes to find some closure and to ensure that her father's legacy is remembered for the right reasons. In the broader context, Paris's revelations have sparked a conversation about the ethics of the entertainment industry, the pressures faced by artists, and the responsibilities of those who manage and care for them. Michael Jackson's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, the exploitation of talent, and the human costs of the relentless pursuit of success. As the world continues to process Paris Jackson's shocking disclosure, one thing is clear: the story of Michael Jackson is far from over. The questions she has raised demand answers, and until those answers are found, the mystery of his death will continue to captivate and confound. The Jackson family, known for their unity in the face of adversity, has rallied around Paris in the wake of her revelations. Her brothers, Prince and Blanket, have publicly supported her decision to speak out, and the family as a whole has reaffirmed their commitment to preserving Michael's legacy. Yet, behind the scenes, the strain is evident. The burden of carrying the truth, as Paris sees it, has not been easy. She has spoken about the sleepless nights, the anxiety, and the fear that have accompanied her decision to come forward. The weight of public scrutiny, combined with the knowledge that she is challenging powerful forces, has been overwhelming at times. But Paris remains resolute. She has often said that her father's strength is what keeps her going, and that she draws inspiration from his ability to persevere in the face of unimaginable adversity. The Jackson family has also had to contend with the legal and financial implications of Paris's revelations. There are concerns about potential lawsuits, both from those implicated by her claims and from entities seeking to protect their interests. The family is no stranger to legal battles, having fought numerous court cases over the years, but this time the stakes feel higher. This is not just about money or reputation. It is about the very legacy of Michael Jackson and the truth about how and why he died. The global reaction to Paris Jackson's revelations has been a mixture of shock, support, and skepticism. Fans of Michael Jackson have largely rallied behind her, expressing their belief that she is finally bringing to light the truth that has long been suppressed. Social media has been flooded with messages of solidarity, with many fans calling for a thorough investigation into the claims she has made. However, not everyone is convinced. Critics have pointed out the lack of concrete evidence to support some of Paris's more explosive allegations. They argue that while her story is compelling, it is still largely circumstantial, and without more substantial proof, it may be difficult to achieve the kind of justice she is seeking. Some have even suggested that Paris may be misremembering events, or that her perspective has been influenced by the trauma of losing her father at such a young age. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing is certain. Paris Jackson has reignited a conversation that many thought had been put to rest. Her bravery in speaking out, despite the personal risks, has reminded the world that the story of Michael Jackson is still unfolding, and that there are still many unanswered questions about his life and death. Jackson's revelations, the calls for a renewed investigation into Michael Jackson's death grew louder. Advocacy groups, public figures, and fans worldwide began to pressure authorities to re-examine the case, citing the new information provided by Paris as a potential catalyst for uncovering the truth. Despite the legal and procedural challenges, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office eventually announced that they were reviewing the case, albeit cautiously, to determine if there was sufficient cause to reopen it formally. The Jackson family, buoyed by this development, hired private investigators to dig deeper into the circumstances surrounding Michael's final days. These investigators began to re-interview key witnesses, analyze old and new evidence, and explore the financial dealings that might have played a role in Michael's decisions during that time. The family believed that the original investigation had overlooked critical aspects, possibly due to the influence of powerful interests who wanted to keep certain details under wraps. One of the first areas of focus was the financial arrangements surrounding the This Is It tour. The family's investigators uncovered documents that suggested there were significant penalties and financial implications tied to the tour's cancellation. These documents revealed a complex web of contracts, insurance policies, and legal agreements that seemed to place immense pressure on Michael to perform, regardless of his health. The more they dug, the more it became apparent that there were significant financial motivations at play, which could have contributed to the extreme stress Michael was under. In addition to the financial pressure, The investigators also looked into the people who had been in Michael's inner circle during his final months. They discovered that some individuals who had portrayed themselves as Michael's close friends and confidants had, in fact, been involved in questionable dealings behind his back. There were indications that these individuals had manipulated Michael, taking advantage of his trust and his increasingly fragile state of mind. One particularly disturbing discovery involved the medical care Michael had received. Beyond Dr. Conrad Murray, who had been convicted of involuntary manslaughter, there were other medical professionals who had provided treatment to Michael, often without proper documentation or oversight. These doctors had administered powerful drugs and treatments, sometimes at Michael's request, but often without considering the long-term impact on his health. The investigation suggested that there had been a pattern of enabling behavior, where medical professionals, driven by financial incentives or a desire to stay in Michael's good graces, had failed to act in his best interests. As the investigation progressed, more troubling details emerged. The private investigators found evidence suggesting that Michael had been under surveillance in the weeks leading up to his death. This surveillance appeared to be more than just routine security. It involved tracking his movements, monitoring his communications, and even observing his interactions with certain individuals. The purpose of this surveillance remained unclear, but it added another layer of mystery to the case. The Jackson family, especially Paris, became increasingly vocal about their belief that Michael's death had been the result of a deliberate and calculated plan. They stopped short of accusing any specific individuals publicly, but their statements made it clear that they believed powerful forces had played a role in pushing Michael to the edge. As the investigation gained momentum, the Jackson family faced a new legal battle. Some of the individuals implicated in the investigation began to file defamation lawsuits against the family, claiming that their reputations were being unfairly tarnished by the allegations. These lawsuits threatened to bog down the investigation in legal disputes, potentially diverting attention away from the quest for truth. In the aftermath of the trial, the Jackson family focused on healing and moving forward. Paris Jackson, who had become a powerful advocate for mental health and artist rights, continued to speak out on these issues, using her platform to raise awareness and promote change. She also dedicated herself to preserving her father's legacy, ensuring that his contributions to music and culture would be remembered for generations to come. The investigation into Michael Jackson's death had finally come to a close, but his story was far from over. His music continued to inspire and influence, and his life remained a subject of fascination and debate.